Some they call it functional alcoholism, but if you know anything about Ben, he's got vision with precision, microphones and a tinkle of derision. You're about to hear what beer can be. It's time for Barley and Me.
Welcome to Barley and Me. I'm your host, Ben Rice. We're here today in Fort Collins, Colorado. Quite a trip. We're here today at Purpose Brewing with owner and brewer Peter Bouckaert.
Do I need to say something?
Yeah.
Hello.
Sorry, that should have been a rule also.
Okay.
But yeah, just so that people know who's who in the recording.
And
And also Frezi Bouckaert.
Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah.
So we got connected because of this thing you did, Peter. And Frezi, you were also in the movie.
Yeah.
It's called Beer, a Love Story, a documentary made by Fritz Moser. And it's a wonderful documentary. So before we get to that, though, how's business here at Purpose?
business. Oh yeah. As you can imagine, it's been a very interesting year. If you look at the calendar year. Because it's almost been a year ago that it's more than a year ago that we were closed down.
Yep.
Half March until May, for a non-packaging brewery was really fun. We started learning Spanish to keep ourselves busy, and hopefully that has use later. But then after May, surprisingly, it really picked up. We could create some outdoor seating. We were closed down again the month of December. Not closed down. We could only do outdoor seating, who sometimes in Colorado in December can be hard. But then since 2021, it's actually been very good. People really love to come out, and we create outdoor seating even when it's cold.
Yeah.
We have heaters,
So are you guys entering into the parking lot area to do that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We had to, because a lot of people don't want to come inside yet, although we have a pretty good spread out and kind of how it's a very small tap room that we have, but there's like different locations within tap room that actually accommodate people to space out easily. So that has helped. And so we're at 50% capacity, who's actually almost 100%.
Yeah, it's like that's what it looks like normally, so we're already fine.
But pretty soon we are hoping to do an actual patio in the back first, and then ask for permits for the front sides. Hopefully we're going to be able to do that permanently, the parking lots.
Yeah. So
Dress
the landlord we rent, the landlord has really been working with us, and so has been very willing now. Oh, you want to do an upfront patio? Although it's kind of blocked by an entry road on the parking, we're just going to take it over.
Nice.
He doesn't mind. So who's really great. He also has helped us out during this period.
I think it's a perfect combination. They sell the bikes and we do the beers, and bike and beer. What else do you want?
Right.
Yeah, this is for Collins, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Which I had not been to before. It's pretty like in my head. I'm like, yeah, Fort Collins. It's an old military town. It's probably very condensed, but of course, time happens and cities pop up and expand. And I'm like, oh, this is much more of a broader place than I thought. I'm like, I'm the urban one. You guys are all the Colorado people. You don't have people around.
We are pretty much natives. We have been here since '96. So.
Yeah. 25 years, we've seen it expanding quite a bit here, and it doesn't help that we've been rated very well as this is the town to retire, this is the town to grow up.
Okay.
And so, but the city has been great on putting bicycle paths everywhere that are completely separate from the roads, who have underpasses or overpasses. And so biking is really the thing to do here. So
yeah. And I'm going to go back to something you said. You said you had to learn Spanish during the shutdown to help keep you afloat. What does that mean?
Oh, that's a question for later. I've been enticed about the development in Central and South America on the beer side. And it feels a bit like Fort Collins was 25 years ago on the beer side. It was underdeveloped. We were in a backwater called Colorado at that point for beer. And people were like, New Belgium? Like Belgium? isn't that the capital from Brussels or something? People didn't have any clue about beer. And I kind of see that now in South America. And so when the pandemic started, we're like, okay, let's learn some Spanish because that could help us later on.
Yeah, absolutely. It never hurts to know another language, which in America is not what we do. We don't really focus on that aspect of the
English
world.
is my third language.
Right, exactly. And here I'm like, and you speak it perfectly, and I'm just like, in high school I took some Spanish classes, and I was like leaps and bounds above my classmates, but I'm like, I would not be able to carry on, even have a conversation with another speaker.
We come from a small language group. We call it Flemish because Europe is old, and the Dutch and the Flemish don't agree, and so we're speaking Flemish, although it's kind of like Dutch. But we grew up close to the French border, so French was our second language, and for Fri's grandmother actually was French, Francophone, we call it. And then English was third, German was fourth. I was pretty fluent in German when I did my army duty in Germany, but I understand it still and I read it, but speaking becomes hard.
Yeah, I can't. The worst part is I can't even imagine learning it, whereas in Europe, it's pretty much taught from an early age, right?
They just say Schweinepuppenfleisch, and you just have to understand it.
Yeah.
No, but even when you work in a business, you pick up the phone and you don't know which one of the 4 languages you can have on the other side.
It's true.
So.
Yeah, because it's Europe is a lot more compacted than the U.S., so you're constantly interacting with people who are you're taking a day drive, and it's another country, whereas here you take a day drive, you're still in Colorado.
Yeah, we sometimes went shopping in France, just grocery shopping, because it wasn't that far.
Yeah.
Right now they are not allowed. The borders are still closed again.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So you came to Colorado in the 90s, started at New Belgium, but now you're here at Purpose. What kind of made you want to branch out on your own?
I've always been very focused on learning, and the month after I started in New Belgium, we started talking about employee ownership, and basically Kim and Jeff, who were the 100% owners at that point, were like, well, you guys are the employees, we're going to give you 1% a year of the company, you guys figure it out how you're going to divide up. So we, as the newbie at that point, I only started this September, and that was October, and ownership went in, I think, January or something. So at the newbies, they decided the newbies need to apply. The old bees are going to be just rolling into it. And so we had to say why we wanted to become an owner. And since I was the only foreigner really working there, they were like, well, how long are you going to stick around here?
Yeah.
And I thought that was kind of a stupid question. I'm going to use the word stupid.
Yeah, that's fine.
Because for me, it's as long as I can learn.
Yeah.
And so I only said that, and people kind of like, he's not going to stick around. But to me, that's a drive. And so it was an honest answer. So, but it took me 21 years. So
yeah, exactly. Because there's always something to learn. And going to that film, Beer Love Story. Now, I'll just say this directly to your face, Peter. When I was watching it, I was like, yeah, I get that it's a documentary about beer history and beer styles and how beer has progressed. Where's the love interest? And then like, oh, by the way, there's this guy, Peter Bouckaert. And immediately I'm like, I'm in love with this man. Like you're
Me too. I'm in love.
Yeah. I don't understand how you did it. It's like, I'm just like, this guy has this wonder and joy and like just a desire to learn, like you were saying. It was so palpable immediately. I don't know if it's Fritz was like, we're going to film for 4 hours, then we'll figure out when Peter becomes Peter. But I'm pretty sure it was immediate. Like
it was really fun. Like I met Maarten and Fritz, or Friedrich is his name, in Brussels. I had to speak on a conference in Brussels together with from Brooklyn.
Yeah, the owner of Brooklyn Brewing.
Yeah, Steve Hindy.
Yeah.
We both had to speak. We were the only ones from the US. And so they approached me at a certain point in the conference. Hey, we're making a documentary. I'm like, okay, yeah. And Maarten was from Brussels itself, so he kind of knew the ins and outs. I'm like, okay, let's go for beer tonight because you know the location. And so we started chatting over beers and we're like moving, like, what would that take? Like, okay. And they were still developing the idea at that point on what exactly they were going to do. Since Friedrich was from Austria, he engaged an Austrian brewer to kind of be a center point of the movie. But just talking over beers, they're like, oh yeah, we should do this. We should just start making a documentary and start shooting you in it. We're not going to come over to Fort Collins. Yeah. And it became then Yakima, it became Rodenbach, my old place where I used to work. So it was a fun adventure. Yeah,
I loved, because the opening for you is you at Rodenbach, and you're speaking very conspiratorially. You're like, I'm going to steal this beer. Like, I don't know why you're saying what you're saying. I'll take it. Like, it was such a joy to watch. And
it was fun also because in Rodenbach, Rudy, where I worked with 25 years ago, is still there right now. Yeah. And so Rudy and I walked around in Rodenbach, the Fooder 160. Yeah. It was a fun. You should watch the movie or the documentary. It's really a fun one, I think.
It is a fun movie, and it was fun to make it. But yeah.
Yeah. And I was very glad that you were in there because I think it helped really to seal the movie because you're such a bridge from the old world of brewing to the new world of brewing. And now, because right now the brewing world is, they announce like, oh, this guy won with a pastry stout, basically, which is the modern beer. But then you're like, I'm going on my bike ride and I see these things along the road. Can I put this in a beer? And now that's kind of what you're doing here, right?
Yeah, the beer you're actually tasting right now, we were biking in Las Cruces, New Mexico, 14 days ago. And the neighbor had a honey mesquite tree that had dropped some beans. And so we grabbed some of those beans, and Frezi and I said to our friends, tonight we're going to make some food. And we had two different things that we were tasting. Oh, no, we were tasting branches of mesquite also, because we had heard that mesquite is a very sacred tree from the Indians and that they use everything. So I wanted to explore. And so we started right away chewing on a bean that we just got from the ground and put it in some beer. And it's actually quite flavorful. It's kind of salty, but then if you get around the bean, it's almost like cacao. Mm-hmm. And so we climbed over the wall again and we got some more from the neighbor. And that's the beer you're drinking right now.
Did you just use the beans or did you also do anything with the wood at all to put something?
This is only the beans.
Okay.
We didn't bring the tree.
Okay. Hey, never hurts to ask.
No, but yeah, and it's always fun to see because everywhere you go, you brought a Murana wood to the States as well. So it's always fun to...
we shopped around also in Las Cruces. We did some authentic stores kind of looking around what's out there that could be of interest. It's a semi-desert except for the Rio Grande Valley. And so it's kind of interesting, and a lot of cactuses that they actually were selling in the grocery store. Mm-hmm. Peppers, of course, because the research center for the Pepper Institute is in Las Cruces. Oh, okay. And I wanted to visit that, but that was closed. But this is one of those jewels. I'm like, where is the Pepper Institute? Because I know we called it once when we did a collaboration with Cigar City. And so I just knew it was in New Mexico. I didn't have any clue where it was going to be. And then, it's here. And we were very close in Mesilla. We biked from his house to Mesilla, who's like the old town in Las Cruces. And the university is almost just across from it. So, but we didn't go because it had closed for this. Like everything was closed last year.
Yeah. You kind of have to hope it's open, but the likelihood is it's not. Yeah. But never hurts to check.
Yeah. But I kind of see my mind also. There's always stuff. There's always wealth of wisdom in the people you're talking with. And they're going to bring you to things that you wouldn't have thought about. And I had it in Porto Alegre last year. I'm talking with a brewer and I'm like, I would like to use Aruera. And he's like, Aruera? You saw those two trees when you came into the brewery? That's Aruera. It's the pink peppercorn tree.
Okay.
And so I said, whoa, this is Aruera. So I went right away outside, cracked some branches, and those branches ended up here in beer.
Yeah. And there's not a lot of minds like yours. I feel like you have one of those minds that just wants to know.
But I think
what will happen?
I approach it more as a chef, and I think there's crazy chefs.
Yeah, that's true.
I think not crazy chefs,
But
but
inventive,
chefs are sometimes more willing
to see what happens.
Yeah, because imagine that a chef in Germany only could use the Reinheitsgebot, only 3 ingredients like potatoes, butter, and meat or something. Like the world would be beautiful in the culinary aspect of Germany, you know? Who would ever invent that? Nobody would. Hey, that's kind of a stupid idea. Reinheitsgebot, come on. The Belgian Reinheitsgebot is just knowledge, experience, and creativity. And so we only use those 3 ingredients. So life is good.
Yeah. You talk about that exact thing, that knowledge, creativity, experience kind of tying together. And the more knowledge you have, the more creativity you can have, because you now know you've reached a limit and you're like, where can I go next to keep going? Because like when I was a kid, my mom is a music professor, and she's like, you got to take these music theory classes. I'm like, no, that's not how you get creative. Why would you need to know that stuff? It's just a very young person's idiotic thought that creativity has to come from breaking rules, as opposed to knowing the rules and how to manipulate them. And kind of using your experience within those rules to go to the next thing. And
you have to see it also, like some beers that you're making, you sometimes over rely on one ingredient. It could be experience, it could be knowledge, it could be creativity. But I think the best beers are mostly blends of 3 different ingredients. Like if you just use the butter in your dish, it's not going to be that great. Yeah. You better put something in that butter. And so it's the same. The best beers that are created or where people use some of their knowledge, maybe unique knowledge, and then build further on their experience and then throw in some creativity, and it's there.
So for like butter, if you're doing a beer world thing, if you're going to compare it, like, because American cuisine is very heavy on butter because it provides richness and amplifies flavors. But, like, it's not the best for you. But I think in beer, would that kind of be like a 2-row malt? Like, we'll just do 2-row, and then we'll throw some hops on it, and we're good to go.
The butter has become a bit more... maybe it's more the malt nowadays. But those are the tools that we're talking about. Those are not ingredients anymore. I think if you look at American brewers right now, the overemphasis on hops, we do have such a beautiful hops in the US right now, thanks to us craft brewers who have really been working with, luckily we have big farmers, hop farmers, and so it was very easy to work. If you started knowing the family of a farmer, they were willing to start trying, and they brought you in their experimental hop yard. And so the connections were very fast made, and look how flavorful we became on the hops. But hops are only one tool in brewing, and I still think that but it's maybe a moment in time, but we over rely on hops as a tool. The best beers are never created with only one tool. Yeah. So that's kind of a lot of the hop aromas you can get from roses, you can have from pine, you can have from other ingredients also who are actually way more beautiful, I think, from a creativity stance. Yeah, because so I'm on beer number 2. We had the special house, which we talked about with the mesquite. So now we're on Don't Beer the Reaper, which is made with Carolina Reaper peppers. And you said, don't worry, it won't be too spicy. Now, I'm a big spice guy, so it's not. But it's also like, if I wasn't a big spice guy, I feel like this would be like, ooh, that's a little bit of a kick on it. It has some kick, yeah.
But also, I just want to say, these beers are beautiful, and I think that's because of what you're putting into those beers. Get that richness of color is an important part, an appealing part of the palate.
Yeah, but for me, I think as kids brewers, we want to use ingredients, and then if you find an ingredient, we are gonna overemphasize it. And think about the West Coast IPAs. When they developed, they started to focus on good aroma, but they overshot on the harsh bitterness. And it almost became a thing that, oh no, I can do 80 IBUs. Well, I can do 90 IBUs. And IBUs is one of those stupid measurements that it doesn't relate to taste.
It doesn't.
So you can mask it completely, or you can enhance it even with the same IBU range. It's about the perception of bitterness flavor, and from a humankind, bitterness is more a warning. If something tastes bitter, it's mostly because it's going to be poisonous or something else. And so we want to stay away from it. But we have had those explosions in fields of flavor that then have been overemphasized. And with Purpose, what I want to do is, we use weird ingredients, and we're not going to make you suck on a honey mesquite bean. We're going to use it as an ingredient, like a chef would do. And so we do that with the heat. The heat is present. It's going to, like for Frezi, it's too much. I'm not such a person looking for too much heat in my food, but this is something I can drink. Yeah, I'm not going to, maybe not going to drink too, and I'm not going to pound it. Yeah, it's not a beer. When I'm working here a day and I'm done, I'm like, okay, now I need a beer to pound. This is not a beer to taste.
It's very much a beer to blend with food. Like if you're already eating a spicy food, this is like a nice, beautiful pairing. It's elegant. It's beautiful. Like, and look, I'm only 2 beers in, and I can already tell I'm just going to see that every time.
We do quite a bit with that. Like once a month, we have we call it Speakeasies. We have a beer dinner, and it's really fun to see Peter interacting with the chef on those moments.
I also make beer specific for restaurants in town. Okay. And so they're like, oh, the keg is almost empty. What else are you going to deliver? And so how's the menu looking like? And then, okay, I'll bring you something. And they just let me bring something. And we actually, the number 5 that you're going to taste is...
There's no number 5 in my 66?
No, the beer number 5
okay.
Is... we smoked it with smoked black tea. Okay. In a nice malt-forward beer. And that is going to a restaurant that's more focusing on pizza, but with a very creative chef. And so, again, he initially smoked malt for me, and I was using that for a beer dinner that we did last week, 2 weeks ago.
Was he using like his pizza oven as kind of a kiln of sorts? Or?
No, he has like a little smoker. It's it's like a desktop smoker. Okay. It's really funny. And so he smoked malt, and then we dry hopped with the malt to extract the smoke again. And so, that beer really stood out during the dinner. It was very soft on the smoke, and the maltiness. We served it with a rich cheese and charcuterie dish. And so the beer, the maltiness really could go with it. The smoke was just the top note on it. And so we're going to do it. This is a little bit more smoked, but it has that tea character also. So
it's a little bit more smoked, but I think it's going to be awesome with those pizzas in the restaurant. Yeah. It's going to be really cool.
So what did the smoking of the black tea do to it as far as the flavor profile versus steeping it?
What do you mean with steeping?
Like if you were going to put black tea into a beer, it would go in there. Would it be basically? It would basically be steeped.
We steeped it in a beer, or I call it dry hopping because we lack kind of a term.
But did the smoking of it do anything as far as changing the flavor profile?
Oh yeah, the smoke. The smoke is easy extractable. Smoke is kind of. If you look from flavor of smoke, you want to cool down the smoke a bit before you're going to precipitate on something. Or you can precipitate on whatever. Yeah. Initially, we were trying to precipitate on endive, and then we're going to use the endive for dry hopping.
So that's actually the smoked one. I only gave you a little bit for the moment.
Okay, that's fine.
So that you see that.
You tried with smoked prosciutto also. That was hilarious. The smoke definitely we could extract from the meat, but we also extracted like fatty components.
Yeah, and that I'm sure went well. I'm sure that went really well for you. Everyone knows fat.
Normally for Halloween I make a beer with bacon, and I boil the bacon twice and to get the easy fat extracted, and then I freeze it and dry hop with the frozen bacon, so that and the foam is excellent on it, and there's no carryover of fat, but you get the bacon in it, and we call it smoked witch. So we use some smoked ingredients also in it. So we just play around. Yeah. The witches, or burnt witch, I think it is.
Oh, okay.
So we have some meaty character from the witch that we burn. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember when I was first getting into beer, people were like, oh, you can't, like, there's that voodoo bacon maple beer that Rogue did. They're like, you can't put bacon in a beer. That was like the rule of beer. You can't put fats in beer. And people were like, oh, we can't? Well, we can still put bacon in. We'll figure it out. And so, like, a lot more people are figuring out how to get the fats rendered out properly so they don't affect the beer because it'll mess up everything.
I still think that Frezi didn't like the prosciutto, the smoked prosciutto, but I still think the fatty character could be another dimension on beer flavor. But not sure yet what to do. So it's one of those things that you played with it. It's kind of in your knowledge that you can do something with it, but now how are you going to make something that's beautiful out of it? And that can happen 25 years, or maybe I'm dead in 25 years, but can happen tomorrow or 25 years from here. I don't care. It just goes in my notes that I did that, and then you read your notes and like, oh, I forgot about that smoked prosciutto beer. Huh. What should I do with that?
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think it's something you should work on over the years and just call it prosciutto of happiness. But
That's a good one.
and then you're just like, I'm constantly pursuing how to perfect this beer. It's fine.
Yeah, but we always say the same thing. That still, it's the rules for an artist is just getting history 30 years, and then you make it in 3 minutes. But that's just your art has to pursuit of happiness. Perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, I always do that. I'm like, I love playing with words. Like that's my art is words. So it's like it's in there. I got to put it out there, and we'll see what happens.
We're gonna trademark that one. Okay.
Free of charge. I'm not. My art is like free. It's just take it or don't. Like.
No, if we use, I think we're gonna use that word.
Okay, perfect. And it's on record, so go for it.
Perfect.
Just like, what did he say? Oh yes, it's in the recording. So.
Yeah, I always did a very small batches, so my prosciutto to beer ratio was a bit exaggerated, but I like to exaggerate in the first test to kind of see what you get, and then it's always easy to dial it down. So, but whatever, I think it needs something else, and maybe it will never exist, or maybe somebody will hear this and they make it tomorrow.
It's true. They might beat you to it. You got to get on it.
That's one of Peter's drawback. A lot of people are like, what did he use? What did? Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Often replicated, never duplicated, I think maybe is
Yeah.
what you are. So I'm getting this Floof, which in my world out in Sacramento, Floof is always like a thing they'll use to sell their hazy IPAs. It's a floofy beer. This is not. This is an extra fluffy lager.
Yeah.
What does that even mean?
Well, just the name, when we had it in the bright beer time, it was in the fermenter still, before it was even carbonated, that beer was so floofy. It had so much foam already generating capacity without CO2. And CO2 is normally what drives the foam out, but just pouring something from the sample cock, that beer was so foamy already. And so that's why we call it Floof. And we're like, wow, this is floofy. So we are a taproom-focused brewery. We pretty much don't package much, so we don't have to worry about trademarks. We can just name it here whatever we want.
Are we going to have some cans of the Floof?
We have done some cans of
I
the
thought we were going to do some again.
we normally don't repeat beers, but this kind of has become something that people like, and so from time to time we brew it again.
Yeah.
We use French hops in it, and so that was the limiting factor, and we finally found some. The hop that is in Bar Bruges is known as a French hop is kind of way more flower focused, but the Elixir hop, we started using that when it was an experimental hop still, and that one is very nice and spicy.
Yeah.
And so it's the brewers that know it all are very excited about it, but it's not many people know it already.
Yeah, I was like, this beer has a little bit of a spice to it, but also I just drank the Don't Beer the Reaper, so, but I'm like, but it feels like a different spice, so that makes sense. All those things, like it drinks like I was drinking this and I was like, oh, this is probably like kind of your light lager thing, like 4.2, 4.3. I look over, it's 5.5. I'm like, oh, okay, so you've got a lot of stuff going on in this because it's a very light drinking beer. So I can see why that would be a beer people would want back.
And it's probably the employee favor. Like if you're working here the day in tap room here, you're making a brew, you just have a Floof,
Yeah.
I didn't really want to make lagers because 2.5 blocks from here is Swy Brewing, who's kind of our Fort Collins lager brewery. And I have a lot of respect for Kirk because he's been a long time around here. He's a really good brewer in my eyes, focuses on German styles. And so when Mike wanted to brew a lager here, I'm like, a lager? This doesn't work. So well, let's sell it if Kirk approves.
Okay.
And so when the beer was ready, we invited Kirk and we gave him a beer and we both were like looking, what is he going to say? And Kirk is a man of little words and he just like tasted beer and he nodded like, this is good. And so we sold it.
Yeah.
So it came to me in my head just now that you were in Beer and Love Story. You two are married. What is your love story? How did this happen?
How did what happen? How did we find each other?
Yeah, what's going on?
Deep down, everybody is perfect. So after we are done here, we're going to show you some pictures that are hanging out in our bar. But we found each other spelunking. So
really?
caving.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I was a very extreme
And that's
caver.
why the joke deep down into the
Yeah.
cave is perfect for us.
It's perfect, yeah.
And so Frezi joined the caving club and yep.
I was the light in the darkness.
It's like anything, caving, it's an excuse for drinking beer. But we really were very extreme cavers we did a mapping expedition in Jamaica. We did at that time all the deepest in the world and we worked with small explosives.
Wait, hold on. You can't just wave that away. We work with small explosives. Whatever that means to you is what it means.
Belgium caves are very small, and so
You got to create that opening.
we had to widen them. The most extreme story was a little passage. It was less than a meter long, but we could get through, but we couldn't breathe because it was in water. And so we created a nose hole. So basically, we exploded with nail guns because they could be wet and you just hammer. And so we made a little passage that your nose could be above the water, but you had to be very slow. Otherwise, the water came in your nose.
Yeah.
And it was only like this, but you were laying on your back, very carefully going through. There was a little bit of flow. And it was a little
Okay,
river.
so it's coming up.
And so it was a pretty extreme passage to take. So
we did a lot of caving with a lot of ropes and gears, but we never did diving into caves.
yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
we kept our nose above the water.
But sometimes just barely.
We have extreme stories there, but
And that was just 3 years ago, so.
You wish. No, when we met each other, we said we wanted to travel. And when we had the opportunity to come to the States, we said, okay, it's a different base area to travel again. So that was one of the reasons that we did it.
Yeah, there's mountains. So how's the spelunking in Colorado, I guess?
Not that good.
Not that good, yeah. I kind of like, where are you going for it? Probably not that
We
good.
went to North Dakota and New Mexico, but then Colorado, not that much.
Yeah, the limestone here has been boiled up by the Rocky Mountains when they broke out. So there's actually some caves here close to Fort Collins because there's a small band of limestone, but it's angled completely because of the Rocky Mountains push up. And so it's actually mined for a cement factory right now. But if you map the cave, then it gets protected. And so we mapped some caves here around, and we don't publish. In the US, they don't have the habit, to declare where it's at. So that's not easy to find. And then in the wide wilderness, so south of Steamboat, north of Grand Junction, there's some good limestone. But again, it has been broken up, and so the length of the caves are not very long. And there's not really deep caves in the US. There's very long ones, but not deep.
Very close to Fort Collins and Owl Canyon. There are some beautiful little gems, but they're very small.
Yeah. And do you think that's just because of the way that the land is designed, or do you think it's because of the fact that we're constantly building and kind of ripping into those things to create more?
No, it's because of the Rocky Mountains formation. Limestone forms underneath the sea, so it's flat when it forms. And so that's why if you look at Mississippi, the limestone is still horizontal there, pretty much horizontal. South Dakota also. New Mexico is an exception on cave formation, but the Rocky Mountains pushed up, and so all the limestone, the big plains of limestone have been fractured, and you can see that there's sometimes 1,000 feet height difference would be from one area to the next, just where
because of how it shot up. Essentially, yeah.
And a really fun story. I think it's almost amazing when we think back about it. When we went to Jamaica, we had huge machetes because we had to take away the banana trees before we could reach the caves. So we came back. It was one of the first times, couple of times we had a layover in New York. And in our hand luggage was our machete we had been using, and some little spits that we use to hang the ropes that we hammer into the rocks. And they're like, "Oh, stop, you guys cannot pass." We're like, "Why not? We know we have that machete, so do you want it?" They're like, no problem, machete. Just take it in your hand luggage, you're good to go. But do you have bullets? We're like, what? Bullets? I don't think so. But that were those middle parts that we use to hammer into the rocks. The machete was fine.
We also went with those machetes we had forgotten to take a picture of the whole group.
Oh my gosh.
In caving while we were in Jamaica. I'm like, we're going to publish, because we published our work about the caves we found and mapped. So we had to do a group shot, and the group shot, we're like, maybe we should go to the tropical garden in Ghent. And so we go dressed like we were in Jamaica, relatively loose, with our machetes, and a guy sees us walking in who was working there. I was like, what are you guys doing? And we're explaining that. He's like, oh, that's kind of cute. Why don't you go here in the pond with the
water lilies?
The water lilies. And so we have pictures in the tropical garden in Ghent that we're in the water with our machetes. Yeah, good stories, good fun, good beer.
Is it possible to say that you've done more things than you have not done? It seems like you're kind of...
Oh, there's still so much to do.
There's still so much.
That's the thing. You're living life to the fullest, I guess, is really...
Yeah.
Like, you only get one shot at it.
Yeah.
Correct.
You might as well go nuts.
And you live while you live, so...
Peter's nickname for me is Crazy, so...
That's just because it rhymes. There's no association.
You just go nuts.
So how did you feel when he was like, hey, we're going to move to Colorado and brew for 26 years, I think, coming up?
So Peter had to talk in the craft brewery in Boston. Craft Brewers Conference in Boston. And Kim and Jeff asked us to go out to dinner with us. And Kim was like, hey, we're looking for a Belgian brewer, brewmaster. And Peter was like, well, good luck. And things come to shore, we decide to come to the Rocky Mountains, to Fort Collins, and we come from, what is it? The whole way from Chicago, actually.
We have met a home brewer in the Craft Brewers Conference in Boston, in Maine, and he's like, oh yeah, stay at my house. And so we stayed there, and he had barrels in his house, and while we're tasting the barrels, he's just suddenly passed out. And like, maybe that morning, like, maybe we should give those guys from Colorado there, Kim and Jeff from New Belgium, a phone call, like, to see if they really were serious. And so we called there somewhere, and they're like, okay, we'll be there in a couple of days. And we went to Ontario, Niagara Falls.
Okay.
And then Niagara Falls, we look on the map because there was no phones at that point. I'm like, wow, this is still a while. And Belgium, if you do like the longest distance in Belgium, it's 3 hours. So we just decided to drive, and we closed the doors in Niagara Falls, and we had breakfast in Des Moines, Iowa, where we learned about mall walking, an animal that we had never seen. And then there was cornfields, but then suddenly there were mountains behind those cornfields.
Yeah.
And there was snow on those mountains, and they were so beautiful, like, whoa. And then there was a brewery called New Belgium that we started visiting, and they're like, oh, you're here. Let's start an interview. I'm like, an interview? Like, ooh. What have I done in my life? How do you talk about your acumen when you haven't really thought about for so long? And so I wrote my resume before we had dinner, I think, with Kim and Jeff's house, and then we stayed the second night in their house, and it was like a 48-hour interview. And after that, we went to Rocky Mountain National Park. And we're like, wow. But so there's more dynamic to it.
To turn back in Boston, I decided to come over and to drive over. We were like, hey, we're in the States for 3 weeks. Let's just make a road trip out of it.
Of course.
I saw the mountains, and it was always, from kids off, I started skiing pretty early, and it was always a dream for me to live in Switzerland. Mm-hmm. And I saw those mountains. I was like, oh my gosh. And
second best.
And then Peter saw the brewery that was just built. He called it Castle Without Foundation. He's like, oh my gosh, I can do so much here. So I went up first, and then Peter came behind me, and then all of a sudden I was like, oh my gosh, he's serious now. So I was like, oh no, please help me out. We're still happy we did it.
Yeah.
The road trip was very intense emotionally, but...
I'd imagine. Because when you hit that Midwest where it's just nothing, you're like, what am I supposed to do out here?
And then when we moved...
I was reading about, while driving, the areas I was in, like, because it was the straight route, you put it on cruise and...
Yeah, were you going to like those visitor centers and getting
No,
or were you stopping at...
No, we drove day and night and
I'm just wondering how you're reading about the things. Like, where were you like...
we
had travel books.
Okay. We had some travel books, and so I'm like, well, what is here? And so...
Yeah, and you're like, nothing. There's nothing here. And then...
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it was but okay, then it became a second base for traveling, and so it opened up new doors, so maybe we can start thinking about the third base now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I'm very proud of you for like there's very few people that truly pursue their passions with no end to it. Like, I mean, there's like things in the middle, but like an end, you're just like, no. There's always something.
But there's another element to it that is very crucial. The camaraderie, the community of brewers and breweries is very tight knit. It's very friendly. Mm-hmm. There's not that many industries that are like this, and so wherever we go, we always we bike a lot nowadays, and we always bike for breweries. So we've been biking, visiting breweries in La Cruz, in Albuquerque, and in Tucson. Just because that's what we do, it's a good excuse to bike, but then you start talking to the brewer or the owner, and it's always is a fun conversation because there's beer involved, and it's especially now with COVID, it's fun to check in on each other, like how everybody's doing, what creative ideas actually have been.
Yeah, it's really spurred creativity for everybody. Yeah. It's been really cool to see.
But it's so fun that it's such an open community.
Yeah, because in any other industry, you would not have gone to Svi and been like, hey, try my lager. You'd be like, we're going to bury this guy with our lager. Yeah. That's what any other industry would do. But it's very much like that in all beer communities. I'm mostly Sacramento, but I still travel. So I still, make sure I'm getting episodes in elsewhere. And it's always the same thing.
Yeah.
Well, we've been traveling now a lot too. I hadn't been much in South America or Central America. And since leaving New Belgium, I actually have. And it's, again, so much fun because wherever you go, we do the same. We visit some breweries and you start chatting. And
you always learn from each other.
Yeah, brewery, you're like, oh, you should check out that brewery. And, and so you hear from the brewers referring to each other. And it's just a fun community. And it's crucial, I think, for our passion and to keep on fueling it.
Yeah. Yeah, and, in the U.S., for a long time, it was, kind of, the 80s, 90s, it was very much, you're an industrial area, and you're the brewery for, like, a region. But now, as craft beer has exploded, it's become more of this is my local brewery, which is very much the European model, where every town has their brewery. And so it's really cool to see, at least for me, seeing that kind of happen.
In 2013, I got, CBC, the award for innovation. It's one brewer a year that we pick to do so. And at that point, the Craft Brewers Conference was really big. There was, I think, 7,000 people in the room. And so you have to walk up and say something. And the key thing for me I wanted to say was like, and we live on the best place on earth ever to be a brewer. Because we educated our customers to be willing to try. We can make whatever we want. We are challenging each other. And where has that ever happened? In time, in location. I think this... it's so unique. I think we're a bit in an oversaturation point right now.
Right.
Craft Brewers Conference in Portland, I forget what year that was, but I randomly talked to somebody. I was like, oh yeah, you know something about brewing? And like, can I chat a bit with you? I said, what are you going to do? And he's like, yeah, I'm going to start a brewery, and in 5 years, I'm going to sell it.
Yeah.
I'm like,
That's
oh
so
wow,
sad.
that's the passion now that comes in.
No.
Yeah, and you can always tell those people. That's the nice part of
Sad.
being the scene is you can tell that this person's not in it for innovation. They're not in it for like passion. It's like, we know that you can make money doing this, so that's what I'm going to do. When you sniff it out, people are like, why are people coming to my brewery? Like, because beer drinkers know. They can smell a rat. Like, anybody worth their salt can be like, this is not a thing.
But that innovative part is also why you are so against styles, because when you're styles, you're so boxed in. Like when you go and talk in South America, you always say, okay, yeah, you asked me about the styles, IPA or whatever. I don't even want to talk to you guys about that. Just look at the ground. Just look what you're growing right here and do something with that. Do something local. It's always what Peter's
we
pushing
talked to
for.
the brewers in Argentina, and they're like, oh, we have hops here, but it's the big guys who are growing the hops, and must I get in there, like we did with the American brewers. And then we have to buy American hops, but our currency is so weak, and they're so expensive, and we get last cuts, basically. And said, why?
You've got hops here.
Yeah, why? Argentina, central Argentina, like Buenos Aires and south from there is a similar climate like here, maybe a bit warmer, but then Brazil, oh wow, the ingredients that they have there. The first day that I landed in Brazil, they had jabuticaba, and I always wanted to use jabuticaba. I never had tasted it, and we drive from the airport to town, and there's stand after stand. I said, what is this? And they're like, a jabuticaba. I said, stop. I need to have jabuticaba. And they're like, do you know it? I said, yeah, but I never tasted it. And they're like, never tasted? Right away stopped on the next one, and we were eating jabuticabas on the way to town then.
So I do not know this food. So what is this? What is jabuticaba?
It's a fruit that grows on the trunk of the tree. When it's ripe, it changes from red to deep purple. It's like a lychee that is surrounded by a very tough grape skin.
Okay.
And so the grape skin has a lot of tannins, so who are really
so
good.
it sounds pretty ideal already.
Yeah, and so it gives you a lot of color, but then the fruit is actually very good for the beer. And so the whole fruit is very good as such. And whenever you see a jabuticaba tree that has red berries, you just go to the tree, you have to turn them a little bit to get them off, and you eat them. They're so good.
Yeah, it's so weird because a lot of people don't think, like you're saying, about their local culture. Like what, like you've got to tie. Like if you can, you need to amplify what your local is. Like that's kind of how beer started. What like Pilsner Scout. It's Pilsner. Like that's how beer started. Where do we lose our way that you're making it with what you have?
Yeah, the first trip to Brazil, and we were driving to brewery. We were going to do collaboration with a bunch of brewers, and the beer was somewhat defined that we were going to make. And while we're driving, in the canopy of trees, there's huge trees that are flowering, yellow, white, and like purplish. I said, what are those trees? And what are those flowers? It's ipe. I'm like, okay, ipe. I said, are those flowers edible? And they're like, yeah, IPA is edible. You can use the wood. You can use it for cachaça. The flowers are edible. We double-checked on the phone, so we stopped somewhere on the road, and we started eating flowers, and the white and the yellow were really different in flavor.
Okay.
And so when we arrived at the brewery, it was a fantastic, beautiful farm brewery. The owner showed us around with cinnamon trees, and it was like heaven on earth, with a mill that was driven by water wheels. Just fantastic. And they had IPA trees. So guess what? We dry hopped with IPA flowers. And so we plundered some yellow and white flowers. We didn't find the purple ones at that point.
Okay.
Coming back to the movie Beer, which is a really fun movie that we made, one of the most, the moments we say, wow, he's filming this incredible, is when Peter was using saffron. And the way he was filming the whole saffron with little threads, it's just watch the movie. It's just amazing.
Yeah.
But then also when we were filming in Yakima, and we were talking with the farmer, and Friedrich was had his camera pointing up, and he's just filming. I'm like, we were kind of done. We were hungry, and we're like, what should we do? I said, hey, Friedrich, we would like to go to eat something. He said, just look at my camera. And he was just filming up towards the sun. And so as the leaves and the flowers of the hop moved from time to time, the sun came through and makes like those stars that you see on the film. And it was just so beautiful. But what the heck were we were doing there hanging around? So we left and we ate.
And again, that makes me think about enjoy the moment, enjoy your location, use what you have right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, Friedrich he has the same passion.
Yeah.
Around filmmaking, and if you see the documentary, the filming quality is just incredible.
Yeah.
And he is just an eye for it, and he just...
Wait, he shot it on iPhones?
No.
An eye for it.
He
eye
has
for
an
it,
eye
okay.
for it. He
I was
just...
like, but that's nuts. Okay.
Yeah, he had a camera, like, when we were filming the saffron, he was like less than 2 inches from my hand that was taking the saffron, and so I had to be very precise. I had to like move up a millimeter in front, otherwise it looked like 2 elephants that walked into the saffron. And then suddenly you see that those elephants are fingers, and you come a little bit more in focus. But at that point I said I need to see it because I cannot even...
Yeah, I can't picture what you're saying.
Yeah, and so if you look at it, he always tries to film. If we go to Rodenbach, he films the windmills that are there. If he came to Fort Collins, we filmed that horse to it. That's where we saw the deer. I was just doing blah, blah, blah. And
all of a sudden you see it.
He was filming me, and I saw the deer. I'm like, just pointed. And he is like, turn the camera. And
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so important to be passionate, though, with your art.
Oh, yeah, and his art is filming, and he does a great job on it.
Yeah. And with
Fantastic
storytelling,
job.
yeah. And like his other documentaries are nothing like this one. So like he just has a way of like figuring out where the story is and how to get it out of people again.
But when I met them in Brussels, they were still more in the conceptual stage. And so they had been, Martin and Fritz had been in England somewhere, and they filmed there also. And they were drinking one evening in the pub, and they're like, yeah, what else can we make documentaries from? And they're like, well, we're drinking beer. And Martin is from Belgium, so he's like, we have a lot of good beer in Belgium. Maybe you should come over once and let's talk about ideas for filming. And so then they saw that there was a forum, or basically a conference around beer, who was technical but also visionary. They were trying to create different types of paths during the conference, and so they just stumbled upon there and kind of started meeting people. Steve Hindy, they filmed that Greek brewer that talks with on a panel together with the head brewmaster from Heineken.
Yeah.
And so they had some elements, but they hadn't developed really their concept yet.
Yeah, and because you don't know what you don't know, and they're not beer people. They enjoy beer, but it's like, well, what do beer people know? What can we get from that? So, like, I'm working on another project, still in the development phase of it, for a podcast that's more not this. It's not going to be interviews. It's going to be more of a documentary style, which I've never done before. And so it's me and another guy that were like in this section of the world, but we were observers.
Yeah.
we had direct connections with the industry, but we weren't in the industry. And so our understanding of what we were doing may be different than people that are actually in it, but we still have those connections. We're like, let's reach out to the people we knew back in like 2003, 2004 and have them tell their stories. Then we can figure out what it is, because I think I know what the story is, but I wasn't technically there. I was there, but I was on the periphery. So like, I think he had the same problem. It's like, I think I know what the story is, but I won't know until I talk to people.
Yeah.
And they'll be like, okay, this is a recurring theme, and I should be able to get this out there. Yeah. So it's a lot of work. I'm like, I have to sit down I'm going to come back from this trip, and I'm immediately going to sit down and like spend like 6 hours working
and
out.
it's only going to be audible. So wow. So
Nice.
Yeah. It's so it's going to be tough. And like my roster of people to talk to is like 65 already. And I'm just like, oh boy, because we're trying to span eras. So like we're trying to span all that time, things change, you know, like the industry changes. And so you got to map out. So basically the concept is, why is this space, this time, a hotbed for creativity, but nobody could break out as far as financials? Like, it just, like, you could not survive in this industry.
When I worked on the book Wood and Beer, I learned something about the history of barrels in the US that I didn't really know. But then I started the history conference. So every CBC we do a history roundtable. The BA, the Brewers Association, basically, if you ask, they give you a room and you do whatever you want. And so we've been trying to bring people around history together. But it's interesting how much. The BA also hired somebody in the Smithsonian who had to document the beer history. So that could be for you from 1960 until now, because they had documented in 1960, who was kind of basically a declining world of creating basically low flavor pilsners. And so after that, things have been starting to change. And it's been really interesting to talk with her, talk with those people that are really into history, kind of see on. And it's not a standalone development. It's a food development. It's look at the coffee. When we moved here, the gas station coffee that's there for 12 hours.
Right. Oh yeah, changing coffee's nuts.
Yeah, but it's in different elements. It's we're only a part of a cultural underflow that is happening right now, and so we are just happy that we can create a beer with smoked tea and with the honey mesquite beans, you know. But we can because of what has happened in the US.
Yeah, this opening up of channels, it's great.
A great element like related to Budweiser, but if you look at wood in beer, people were trying to do different things, and so they started using wood chips on trying to get a lagering that is spread out the yeast a bit. And so there was a brewery called Budweiser in the US that kind of latched on to this technology at a certain point, who was a hot technology from 1880 to 1910, and then people started exploring aluminum ships, and then started working on tank geometry, and so the technology disappeared in time, but we had one brewery that latched on it from a marketing stance and is still using this useless technology, basically, or trying to make it useful. I had beers once in Keystone with a researcher from Budweiser, and he basically had to do research on why it was useful to use those wood chips.
Yeah.
And he put wires with direction, temperature, and so flow direction, temperature, and there was one other thing. They had, like every foot, they had registered all those points throughout one of those long lager tanks in the back and the front, and they're such a long tanks. And he had to kind of prove why it was so useful to use wood chips, and he better figured out that it was useful.
Yeah, right.
And we were laughing that night, like, "Oh, let's have another beer. Keep on telling."
Yeah. It's like the cigarette industry telling you why tobacco's not bad for you.
But it was so much fun. Like, hey, they put so much effort in it to prove it, but the world already had walked away only 90 years earlier, you know.
Yeah, right. Like, no, this old thing that people phased out is still pertinent. But I talked to another madman in beer who's just like, what can you do with beer? His name is John Galooly. He's at Drake's, but he was at Dogfish Head. He was at a bunch of places. And he's like, if you have a bad beer, the secret is put it on wood. That's and you might be able to salvage. It.
I always love falling together with Randy Mosher. Whenever we fall together, we typically only do it for one beer, and we go kind of nuts on what we've done in the last year.
And then I've told other people that like, that's gross. You shouldn't do that. It's like, well, I mean, if you want to try to salvage your brew, it's a way. But it's like, well, with Budweiser, it's not particularly. I get it. I get why it exists. But the secret, put it on wood. And like, I don't think beechwood is a particularly flavorful wood profile.
No, they also wash it and cast it. Hey, the wood chips that are used are basically space creators. They're not. That's why people went to aluminum later on. Aluminum chips because they were easier to clean, and then they stopped going away before a minute because you can lager in a different way. You can play with temperature. You can play with pressure. There's different tools that you can use, but it was a hot technology from 1880 to 1910.
Yeah,
it was a long time ago.
I think that's when we moved over in 96. So that's the sour I just gave you.
Okay.
When we moved over in 96. Good one, huh?
Yeah.
That's 66.
This is that Allagash sour profile.
Yes.
Yeah, Rob and Jason. When I left New Belgium, a lot of people were like, "Oh, congrats!" and "Why the heck are you leaving?" And so I'm just starting my own brewery. And by the way, would you mind sending me some barrels? And so that's why I have a bunch of barrels from breweries. People just send a few barrels. So,
like, were they already used with their beer, or was it?
In this case, in Allagash, it was, I think, only used once for a cruise-ship beer.
Oh, okay.
And so they're still very slow barrels because the inoculum is not that big in it, but they're very steady. And actually, there's 65 and 66, and they really develop great beer, but they need time.
Yeah. I've done their brewery tour twice. And because I have family in Maine, so when I go visit, I'm like, let's go to Allagash. It would be stupid not to. But
by the way, that beer was specifically chosen. It was not because it was a bad beer.
Okay. Yeah. It went on purpose. Yeah. With intent. Because everything at Purpose is on purpose. But I went there, I think it was like 5 years apart, and there was this. The first time I was there was this barrel that was very intriguing to me because they had a name for it. It's a test name. We don't know if it's going to ever be what that will be when it comes out. It might have a different name or never get released. And I went back 5 years later, and that barrel was still there. And I was like, I want this beer to exist in the world. It was called Mad Madam Mim, which is from Sword and Stone. And I was like, I want to know what happened to that beer because there's never been a beer called that from them. So I'm like, did they never release it, or did it get a different name? And I just want to know what that beer is. It's so bad.
Yeah.
It's like, we're going to keep it in this barrel in the same room for 5 years. I'm like, what is it? I need to know.
Yeah, they all have their own character, those barrels. And when I chose the barrels for Purpose, the key thing was that they all came from friends, people that I know. And I have only from 2 winemakers barrels. I have it from 2 distilleries, and I have, I forget how many breweries. But you know that they're probably going to be good barrels already. Some only needed help. Most didn't. But I first let them develop on their own. Where I was thinking on was in the movie also we have Fooder 160 that were suddenly standing still in the Rodenbach. Mm-hmm. And I asked Rudy, say, how's Fooder 160 doing? And he's like, good, why? I said, it's the best fooder. And he's like, why? I said, well, the last time I was here, we released 2 times Rodenbach Grand Cru, who was kind of a pyramidal tasting until we found the best fooder around at that time frame. And we served it after a year. But that specific fooder, every year, in the last 2 years I was there, produced excellent beer. And he's like, really? Like, let's taste it. And so we tasted it, and we didn't check on how old it was, but it was really good beer. And so hopefully it's still there. Maybe it was a moment in time where that barrel maybe people didn't know, and they aged the beer for 2 years on it, and it became too sharp, or not harmonious anymore. But at least when we were tasting it, it was still like...
Yeah.
And so they start to do single fooder beers now in Rodenbach. We didn't used to do that when I worked there. And so I think it's an opportunity for them to do something like that.
What an insane palate that has to be to walk through all those fooders and be like, this one's clearly the best. That's a lot of palate work.
Yeah, it is.
To be like, no, this one's head and shoulders.
Well, there's only 300 fooders, and if you age for 200 years, there's around 700 days that you can taste. So it's not that busy, really. Yeah?
That's true. That's true. But to have the recall to be like, this one is distinctly better than.
Here it's smaller. In New Belgium, we could do that also to an extent, but it's smaller here, and I know a lot of the barrels. Yeah, and I know what they want, what beer they want, and what they're good with.
They are your children.
Yeah.
But then some you don't know. And sometimes you're completely surprised. You're like, oh, wow, look what this one did. And 33 is Mike's favorite. And I'm not such a fan of Mike.
Of Mike as a person?
No, of 33. I dumped some... I made a koji fermenting until almost 13%, and I dumped the koji in there, and it actually is still a very good barrel, but it's not my best.
So I'm just thinking about like your history at this point and New Belgium's history in the craft beer world. I think anybody who got into craft beer in America drank a Fat Tire. I think that's an easy introductory beer for most people. But I know my first sour that I really enjoyed was La Folie. Were you involved in that beer's design at all? I'd assume so. That was my guess. Because it's still I've had it like over the years and I still love it. I don't go back to Fat Tire, but La Folie I'd still go back to.
I want a very recent Fat Tire story. We did the collaboration with the Koning, who was one of the models of Fat Tire in Belgium, in Amber, and the brewer I texted him like, hey, if you still feel okay after the 8-hour time difference and the flight here, and you want to have a beer, we're up for it. And so he texted me, I checked in the hotel, I'm up for a beer. And said, okay, let's meet in that bar and have some beer still, depending on how you feel. And before we were in town, it was 10 minutes, and so he already had 10 minutes of pleasure, and he had one Fat Tire. And he comes to me as like, I cannot believe that you dry hop this beer. And if you think about Fat Tire, the dry hop level is relatively low, but for a Belgian,
right.
He's like, who makes amber ales, he's like, wow, this is fantastic. And so he posted last month that he finally made a dry hopped De Koning, and that was inspired by an American brewer called Peter. So, but the La Folie, that was also a hard one because we started the seasonal program when I started in New Belgium. We were going to make 4 seasonals, I think we called it seasonals or whatever. The second one was going to be sour. I'm like, okay, how much time do you have? And they're like, well, 3 months. So we basically started working on a kettle sour, and we really screwed it up. And so we forgot about that, and I think I forget what we worked on. But Robert Polland, who now owns a cheese manufacturing here in town, was working in New Belgium. He's like, why don't we buy some barrels? And so we bought 9 barrels called Enoch 1, Enoch 2, OCA 1, OCA 2, PH 1, PH 2, AB 1, AB 2, and 222. I'm going to come back to that. And we started just aging beer in there. And we tasted it every Thursday to kind of see. And we did 3 different measurements on the optical density, blah, blah, blah. But it affected our volleyball skills because we were volleyballing on Thursday. So we let's stop tasting because we want to play volleyball on Thursday. And so those became kind of the first sour beers in the US. PH1 went on and became very famous. So I'm on 2 tracks here. I'm La Folie and the other one. And so from those 9, 4 are back here. PH1 just left. We brought it to Corey King in Side Project. because that's what PH1 does. But so those barrels are still around. Those 9 barrels became 12. The 12, Robert Pollen and all did the cooperage class in Napa Valley, and talking with all the winemakers there in the cooperage class, they're like, do you have some barrels? And they're like, yeah, how many do you want? 300, 400? I'm like, so at night we were like, how big is a truckload? And we need barrel racks because we had never seen barrel racks. And you can move that around with a forklift. Can you imagine? Because we were trying to lift them. We made those old bars with hooks.
Yeah.
Because how do you move a barrel like that? I didn't know. We didn't know. We didn't grow in wine country. So barrel racks were fantastic. So we need so much space for barrel racks. And we could buy around 80, 85 barrels. And so we bought a truckload. And so we brought those to Fort Collins, and those 100 barrels became footers. And then at that point, Kim and Jeff and Kim, who started New Belgium, Kim was like, what the heck are you doing? Like, you're starting to take up all of that space. Are you going to sell this? I'm like, yeah, maybe we should sell this. And so we started blending from the smaller barrels and made the first La Folie. La Folie was a beer I was making in Boulder, in the Redfish. We made a beer for our first son that was born. And so we were going to bottle some, and bottle condition some bottles. But our son was so early that I had to call Brian, the brewer over there, say, I'm not coming. I was like, yeah, that's great. We're going to bottle and bottle condition. So I'm in the hospital. We just had a son. And so, and then the leftover beer we sold in the pub there, and we called it La Folie because La Folie is you're kind of nuts, but you're kind of fun to hang out with. And the American version is about it's a business endeavor that you're sure to lose money on. So we thought those both names were good. And then New Belgium stole that name, and that became La Folie for the first batch that we bottled. We had a hot tub. Pretty much we were a small brewery. Everybody in the brewery was working on it. I had to number the bottles because I had European numbering. The 1, the 4, and the 7 are different. And recently, a brewer who now moved, an old brewer from, a brewer that was in New Belgium, who moved to Wyoming as a brewer again. He was emptying his basement, and he's like, look, I have some old La Folie from the first batch.
Oh, wow.
And I look at him, I'm like, wow, they're the same numbers. And he's like, I have 3 more, they're all the same number.
So after
because
a while,
we were
you
drinking quite a bit. So yeah, La Folie started on a whim and it was really hard to sell because nobody knew what a sour was in our distribution area, who was really small at that point in New Belgium. And so it was a hand sell where you had to do you drink wine? Close your eyes, give it a taste.
It was funny you asked if you were involved with La Folie because Peter is actually the man, his title is the man who brought sour to America.
Oh. See, I don't even do my research. Look at that. Yeah.
As you did for the
Well, I mean, look, I have to make my assumptions. If you're we're looking for a Belgian beer, brewer, obviously they're looking for a certain thing, which Belgian styles, they have a tendency towards that. Well, not always a tendency,
But I
guess
was trying to say earlier that when we moved to 96, Belgian beer was so, it's like you said before, everything, when something goes wrong, you put it in a barrel. I'm so happy in those years that we actually know we love it. When we moved over and we drank a Belgium, oh my gosh, we were like, what the heck are you guys thinking?
Yeah.
Don't give that back to me.
When I was 13 in Scouts, probably my first beer, I don't know, but we had a night dropping, and so we finally arrived at our destination where we were going to sleep, and we're like, okay, let's crack some beers. And it was a Rodenbach, because it's a pretty easy beer. It's not bitter for younger kids. And so we're like, okay, let's have another one. And one became 2, and maybe 3, I don't know anymore. But we had walked all night and then a couple of beers and we slept very good.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and that's again, America doesn't let their kids drink beers. It's I think with the craft boom of the last 20 years, I think we'll start seeing people teaching their children how to drink responsibly and appreciate it for the flavor that it is.
It's so
and how it complements your food and your activities. So hopefully that comes in.
I think bunch drinking is so much more an American thing.
It's super much.
Yeah, it's because you're just not used to it.
If you forbid it, it becomes
you go nuts when you have an access point. Yeah. And I'm hoping that goes the way of the dodo in America.
It's a different culture.
Yeah.
It's it's the only country that had prohibition, who's kind of an interesting one from a historical stance also.
Yeah.
My holiday breaks, so summer jobs during high school and university. I started bartending when I was 16.
Yeah. You're not allowed to do that. It's a whole thing. And it's just such a weird, but I'm hoping, again, that like with the boom of the culinary arts and everything like that, and how beer's changed, hopefully people are like, hey, have, a tiny bit of this with our dinner. It goes well with fish. It goes well with steak or whatever we're eating. It goes well with this veggie platter. Like, hopefully people are starting to do that.
I still love the muscadet that we served on my confirmation in Catholic. So when you're 12, you have confirmation in Catholic Church. And
you finally get to have the wine.
And so we had on the party, my father was very into wine and he selected the muscadet. And it's still such a good wine. Yeah. And I remember from...
Good wine stays good wine.
I was 12.
Like that's real. I know you guys have to get ready to go. Sorry for taking up more time than we planned. It just happens, unfortunately.
Especially with the beer. Huh?
Yeah, exactly. And they're all delicious. It's unbelievable. So the sour, I was drinking it, then I went back to the Floof, and the Floof tasted even better. It's insane.
Whatever.
Before we get out of here, got to do the thing. Where can people find out more about you, about Purpose Brewing online if they wanted to learn more?
The idea around Purpose Brewing was, first it started with a road trip on my second sabbatical that I took from New Belgium in 16, so that's when I think I came, or 17, one of those years. And when I was in Sacramento, so I just drove west from here, and I made sure every evening I had a brewery close by, and so the conversations I had were rich and fed with beer, and I really was struck about the beauty that there is in American brewing still, just from hanging out with people, with brewers, and see their passion, see what their thing is, whatever their thing is, and so much beauty. And then I also started thinking about it needs to be small. And so how small can you go? Can you do one beer a day and make it a different beer every day? That's kind of stupid. Like, how people are only going to come in for one beer and, oh yeah, we don't have anything else. That's the brew pub we started in Belgium actually was like this. And they said, what about 4 beers every weekend? And so then we had to size the brewery based on that. So we went with a 4-barrel system so that we can fill from one brew 1 barrel. And then we have roughly 3 kegs left to serve. And so that became. Yeah. And so every week we serve nowadays 5 different beers. The easy one is we serve a different barrel every week. So we just taste around and decide which barrel we're going to take. And then we dream up some other beers. I was laughing a lot on Monday. On Monday we have a meeting and it's like our day off. And so we are always drinking a beer, but then we're like talking about beers we could make, or, oh, look what I have in my pocket. I have honey mesquite beans here in my pocket. Maybe we could use those this week. And we just come up with something, oh, that would be a good one. Let's work on that for next month or something. But so we keep on creating 5 beers out every week. And so our customer base, and I'm amazed on the beer savviness. They're not beer geeks. They're not freaks. But they are people who are willing to come in, and most what we sell is a taster flight.
That makes sense.
And
because
when
you're never going to see it again. You want to get it all.
Then they order a beer from that. And so for us, it's always like a bet, like which one is going to sell most. But so it's playing on a mature beer public that is willing to taste. And we just have all the fun of the world with it. So.
And you're constantly educating, I would assume, because you're explaining what this beer is, how it came about.
Consciously educating. Oh, it's all about learning. We are learning ourselves. We're teaching our customers so that they learn. But to answer your question, where can I learn more? We have a website. You can sign up for a newsletter. Our newsletter comes out every week, usually on Wednesday, because every week we have new beers. We're on Facebook and Instagram.
Yeah. And what's the handles on Facebook and Instagram? Like, is it at Purpose Brewing or
Purpose Brewing.
Yes.
nobody ever
Purpose
knows?
Brewing.
Don't worry.
At Purpose Brewing.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's, I imagine Wednesday you're sending out, this is what beers we're going to have, and
Yeah,
this is
so
what
you
they're going
can
to be
sign
like,
up
so
for
you
the
can be like,
news-
oh, okay, I'm excited to try at least 2 of these, so let's do
Yes,
that.
correct.
And honestly, having been here for an hour and a half, I'll just say I'm excited about every beer.
Yeah,
That's
perfect.
Yeah, but it's fun that you walk around and you ask, like, what's my most favorite? And I love it the most when people are pointing in different directions.
Yeah.
And because
something for everybody.
in French they're saying des goûts et des couleurs on discute pas. About taste and color we don't discuss. So
Yeah. I don't like spicy. Some
Yeah.
people love spicy.
Right, exactly. There's something for somebody somewhere.
Yes.
Exactly, at Purpose
Always.
Brewing.
Correct.
All right.
The
so
purpose for Purpose Brewing.
Yep. And so that's, I guess, the end of the episode here. I want to thank you guys so much. Peter and Frezi Bouckaert, thank you so much at Purpose Brewing. And for Barley and Me, you can find Barley and Me across social media at Barley and Me Pod. Check out the other stuff I'm doing. It's another episodes. I don't need to put it in here. We're good.
Perfect. It was fun.
Thank you so much. I want to thank you guys so much. It was a pleasure. It was a joy. It was more than I wanted it to be. That's my favorite thing. And to our listeners, thanks so much for listening. Get home safe.
See ya.